I am so glad everybody's here tonight. You are in for a treat because tonight's workshop is Be the Captain of Your Own Ship. So everyone has a piece of paper, right? Raise your hand if you do not have a piece of paper. Okay, so everybody has a pen also, right? Raise your hand if you do not have a pen. Okay, so here's what I want you to do. On a scale of 1 to 10, rate yourself. Okay, raise your hand if you have not written anything down yet. So everybody's got something written down. Okay. Raise your hand if you rated yourself as a 1. Whew, good. Thank you. Raise your hand if you rated yourself a 10. Darlene. Let's give her a hand. Darlene's a 10. Now, here's the deal. Every one of the rest of you are lying. Because you're all a 10. Who created us? God, right? He created us perfectly. And there is nothing less than a 10 that He created. What we have to do is accept the fact that He created us as a 10, and we can accomplish anything we want, and we can be who He wants us to be. So, keep that in mind as we go through tonight's workshop, because you are all a 10. My goal is to help strengthen your belief in yourself and your ability to do and accomplish whatever it is that is a righteous desire that you should be able to accomplish. You can literally steer your ship wherever you want that ship to go. So, who's heard of William Tyndale? Okay, so a couple of you. I just recently learned about William Tyndale. On October 6th, 1536, William Tyndale emerged from a dark, dingy, damp cell. And he came out where he'd been living for the last year and a half. And he came out into the open, and before they executed him, he was given an opportunity to say one last prayer. And in that prayer, he said, "Lord, please open the eyes of the King of England." And right after that, they strangled him and burned him at the stake. So, why is it that political leaders and the ecclesiastical leaders of the time hated him so bad that they would do that to him? Does anyone know?
He was a Christian.
He was a Christian. What specifically did he do?
I don't know if he was the one that translated the Bible into English.
Yeah. He's the one who was responsible for, now there were parts of the Bible that were translated before that into English, but they were really hard to get a hold of, and it wasn't the complete thing. He was the first one to translate the New Testament, and he did part of the Old Testament as well. He was responsible for translating it from the Greek and Hebrew languages into English, so that his goal, his mission, was so that the common person would be able to know the gospel more than the Pope himself. That's what he said. And so, what's interesting is they killed him, and about 3 years later, King Henry opened his eyes. And he allowed the Bible to come forth. But you know, the Bibles that he translated, and of course was able to, he had connections where they were able to print them, and they were distributed secretly because they would take your life if you had them. But they circulated everywhere, and that was the change, the paradigm that had to be shifted in order for that huge transformation that took place, that allows Christianity to be what it is today. So, William Tyndale lived his life with a purpose. Now, my question for you, if you rated yourself less than a 10, what is your purpose? Do you have a purpose? Do you know what that purpose is? And do you consciously strive to achieve that purpose every day of your life? See, William Tyndale valued the future, not just for him, but for all of humanity. See, his life wasn't about him. It was about what he could do for future generations. He gave his life to do something that he knew was right. So are you willing to make choices today that will not only benefit you, but more importantly, those people who you love and other people for the rest of time? Are you willing to do that? You see, if we value our future, we learn from our past to make changes in our present for a better tomorrow. Who has a past they're not really happy with? Or they would like to at least change some things. You see, if we feel guilty about our past, who does that serve? Absolutely no one. Does it serve us if we feel guilty about our past? No. Does it serve our family if we feel guilty about our past? I mean, nothing we do, it's not going to serve anyone if we dwell on the past and just feel guilty about it. Now, what we need to do from our past, as I've had to do, and I do all the time, is I learn from my past. I accept what I did, and I accept the fact that I made a mistake, and I'm willing to do something different. And I change that. And when we are willing to change our present, we will change our future. You know, I had somebody come in recently. They have been adjusted in another chiropractor's office for a couple of months. Their daughter has been adjusted for a couple of months in our office. Daughter having tremendous results, feeling great, realizing that chiropractic is wonderful. The mom in another office is not feeling so hot. And so she decides, man, I ought to come to this office. Maybe I'll get a different result. And I don't believe even for a moment, I'm not saying that I'm better than any other chiropractor, because I'm certainly not. But what's significant is she came into our office and she got a different type of care. And we explained to her that we don't bill her insurance like other chiropractic offices do. And she had a hang up with that. And unfortunately, she wants to continue seeing this other chiropractor because the insurance is going to pay for it. So keep doing the exact same thing that's not working because the insurance company is going to pay for it. See, that's unfortunate. So the better thing, of course, is what we do, bring our fees down to where people can afford it without insurance, and then just get chiropractic care. And don't worry about what your insurance company is going to do. So our past does not dictate our future. We have to be willing to make some changes, though. And let me give you an example of this. One of my heroes, Benito Pablo Juarez. He was born in 1806. He was born in the high mountains above the city of Oaxaca, I think is how you pronounce that. He was a Zapotec Indian, born in Mexico. His mom and dad died when he was 3 years old. Talk about some challenges. So he was raised by his uncle. Education in the small mountain town village where he was non-existent. There was no education there. And so he was very inspired by his uncle, who was an educated person, to learn. He wanted to learn. And so finally, in fact, by the time he was 12 years old, he did not write or speak Spanish, living in Mexico. But he was very inspired by his uncle. And so he had an opportunity at, I believe, I'm not sure how old he was. He had an opportunity to go to school, to leave the small mountain village. And he was able to go to school. But the Indians were treated very, very harshly. They were not, given the same benefit of everybody else. In fact, all the Mexican people, they were actually able to go into the classroom. All the Indians had to literally be outside, out of the classroom. So they couldn't really even hear what was going on, and they had a tutor that would come out. So the education was just absolutely poor. I mean, he couldn't learn anything. And so finally, he was able to, he quit school, and he got a bunch of his old class materials, and he would read them by the light of a resin lamp every night that somebody gave to him. But he longed for more knowledge. So reluctantly, by the time he was 15 years old, I say reluctantly because he did not have an affinity to the church. The church was required, and he felt like that shouldn't be, we should have freedom of religion. So at 15 years old, because he figured some kind of an education was better than no education, he entered the seminary. He didn't last very long there, though, because of the restrictions from the church at that time. And so when he was 21 years old, there was a liberal college, non-church run, that opened in Oaxaca. And it was looked down on because all the schools were supposed to be run by the church, and anything that was not run by the church was not worth going. In fact, anyone who attended that school, they were not only looked down on, but they were ridiculed, they were harassed, they had a really hard time, not only themselves, but their families, if they went to that school. Well, Benito, he had nothing to lose because he had no family. And so he just decided he was going to live with the punishments that he got and kept on going to that liberal college. Well, because of that, he endured that. At 25 years old, he started his own law practice. 10 years later, when he was 35, he was appointed to the bench, and at 37, he married, and they had a lifelong, wonderful relationship, and he and his wife had 10 children together. They believed in big families. Mexico, as I already said, they had no freedom of religion at the time. And so at 48 years old, he was acting as the secretary to the governor of Oaxaca, and he was told to sign an order that would require everybody to pay tithes to the church. Well, he didn't feel like that was right, so he resigned his position. A high power, high profile position, and he resigned that position. And so at 50, because of that, I believe, and because of the principles that he held strongly, he lived his life by principle, not by what he had to do that day, but by principle. At 50 years old, he was elected to the National Congress. And at 51, he was elected to be governor of Oaxaca. Education to him was a top priority. He said, education is the primary base of people's prosperity and at the same time the sure means for making abuses of power impossible. You see, what happened is the Mexican government, they didn't want people, and the church at the time, they didn't want people to learn. That's the same reason William Tyndale was killed. They didn't want them to learn because if they kept them unlearned, if they kept them without knowledge, then they wouldn't be able to overturn the government. So, Benito Pablo Juarez, he was responsible for building over 200 schools, and he encouraged education for girls, which was absolutely unheard of back then. At 57, the president of Mexico actually deported him and other undesirables because of their stance on freedom for religion. So they had to leave Mexico. Napoleon III invaded, and the French ruled Mexico for a short time. But Benito never lost his vision of freedom of religion, and he was committed to that. So he made it back to Mexico eventually, and he was elected, somehow miraculously, he was elected as president of Mexico. He was responsible for getting rid of the French, and he was a defender of liberty, and people in history compare him to George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. He actually lived at the same time as Abraham Lincoln, and he visited with Abraham Lincoln on numerous occasions. They were of like mind, and they helped each other in some of the things that they wanted to accomplish. See, it says that he is numbered as one of those apostles of freedom who suffered great persecution for the sake of principle and future. Which leads me to that quote that I shared earlier by B.J. Palmer. Make your decision for what is right, not what is expedient, and wash your mind of all compromise. You see, Benito's life was a model of what B.J. said. What made Benito Pablo Juarez what he was is because of his willingness to sacrifice and even suffer his whole life in order to accomplish his mission, his purpose in life. Why did that all happen? Because he started with a big why. Anyone read the book, Start With Why? It's a really good book. I highly recommend it. You see, it talks about living a life of purpose, not just getting up every day. hitting the snooze bar, sleeping a little bit more, hitting the snooze bar, sleeping a little bit more, and just getting up and going to work and just doing what you got to do every day. Living your life with purpose is so much more pleasurable. In fact, all people that have accomplished great things, all people that have accomplished great things live a life of purpose. And they all started with answering the why they do things instead of the how or the what. Let me give you an example of this. Anyone know who Samuel Pierpont Langley was? What did he do? What amazing feat? That's interesting. Samuel Pierpont Langley, his goal was to be the first to achieve machine-powered controlled manned flight. So he was very well respected. He was renowned in the academic community. He was an assistant at Harvard. He taught at the U.S. Naval Academy. He taught astronomy, mathematics. I mean, he was a very, very smart guy. He had connections. He was personal friends with Dale Carnegie, Alexander Graham Bell. He had everything going for him. And because of his connections and because of his great knowledge, he wanted to be the first in flight. And so he was actually given a grant by the U.S. Department of War for $50,000, which back then was a huge amount of money. Money was absolutely no object to be the first in flight. In fact, he assembled some of the best people on his team, the brightest minds. In fact, his mechanic, I can't remember what his name was, just a brilliant guy. The New York Times followed him everywhere he went, and everyone was rooting for his success. Everybody knew who he was. You see, he wasn't the first in flight, though, was he? Do you know why? Because he didn't start with why. You see, his goal was to be rich and famous. And he knew that if he was the first in flight, he would be rich and famous. And that was his goal. A few hundred miles away, there were two not so well-known guys, the Wright brothers. We've all heard of them, right? In Dayton, Ohio. So unlike Langley, though, they did not have a recipe for success. They had absolutely no connections. They had no government funding. In fact, their only funding came from their own bicycle shop. So they had the recipe for disaster. There was no reason why they should have succeeded. No one on their team, including the Wright brothers, had a college education. No one. Yet they were the first in flight. Why did they succeed when Langley failed? Because they started with why. They had an honorable why. You see, they had a dream. They knew why it was important to have flight. They knew that if they built this thing, it would change the future. It would change the way people can transport themselves, and it would change everything. They said that they imagined the benefits to everyone else if they were successful. You see, they weren't thinking about being rich and famous. And I don't know that they ever really did become rich. I don't know the history of that. But I know they became very famous, but not because that was their goal. Their goal was something different. In fact, what's really interesting, a few days after they had the first flight, guess what Samuel Pierpont Langley did? He quit. He quit. He could have very easily said, wow, that is amazing. They flew. And he could have taken the technology that they had learned and built on it and made it better. But because he wasn't the first, he gave up. And no one knows about Samuel Pierpont Langley anymore. Thoughts become things. And if we start with our why, if we have a strong purpose, those thoughts, the things that we think about, can be manifest. In fact, perfect example of this, raise your hand if you've ever had an experience like this, where you're thinking about somebody. You haven't talked to them, a wonderful friend. You haven't talked to them for maybe even years. And something happens and you just start thinking about that person. And all of a sudden, you get a phone call from them. Who's had that happen to them? Wow, almost all of us. Isn't that powerful? Thoughts become things. What we think about will manifest. I was listening to Tony Robbins today, and he said, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. Who's ever had an experience where you've been beating your head against the wall, trying to figure something out, and just nothing seems to work? And it's because you have to learn a few lessons before you get the answer to that. And then all of a sudden, one day, boom, somebody comes into your life, the teacher, and your prayers are answered. The results you're looking for, boom, they just all of a sudden happen. Who's had something like that happen? I know I have numerous times. You see, God has put each one of us on this earth for a purpose. And if we think about that purpose every day, not only can we serve ourselves and those people who are around us, but who knows how many people we're going to serve because of living out our purpose. If our purpose has anything to do, with something that's good, it's going to influence humanity for generations to come. It's like Stephen Covey talks about, leaving a legacy. Speaking about leaving a legacy, Bertha Gilkey, does anyone know who she was? What she did? So Bertha, she grew up in a very, very poor home. No father. In fact, at 11 years old, she moved into what's called the projects in St. Louis. And she lived there, and then as she grew, she ended up living there as an adult as well. She had numerous children. She was told all the time growing up that she would never amount to anything. She was not intelligent. She wasn't pretty. She would just never amount to anything. In fact, none of that was true. She was very beautiful. What happened is because she thought that and people told her that all the time, it really beat her down. But fortunately, something huge happened later in life for her. In the projects where she was living, the gangs had gotten out of control. Crime was rampant. Drugs were everywhere. It was an absolutely terrible place to live. People would urinate everywhere. I mean, it was just an absolutely filthy place, absolutely no pride whatsoever. And it got so bad that the city of St. Louis said, we're going to tear these buildings down. It's that bad. Well, she got mad. What she did is she organized a group of people, starting with all the mothers that lived in the projects. And she shared with them, she organized them, she got them all fired up, and she told them, look, nothing is free anymore. No one is going to give us everything anymore. There are no more free rides. No one cares about us. We're going to lose our homes. We have to do something about this. And so she got all these moms organized, and she gave them back a little bit of pride just because of her commitment. They had nowhere to go. They had no home if they took their homes away. They had nowhere to go. So what was awesome is she set new standards. Because of her instigation, she made it to where no one could urinate in the elevators anymore. She raised the bar. And they enforced that. And all the moms were together, and they held to a new standard. They did it because there was a purpose. There was a why. And in fact, as time went on, she negotiated with the city of St. Louis, and she converted the projects into what's called tenant management housing. They became owners, condominium owners. It was no longer just the projects. And because of her, because she was so successful there, she became responsible for converting over 16,000 public housing units across the country. Isn't that powerful? All these people living in these terrible situations, and she gave them some hope. She said, the government always fails because it works on the buildings, not on the people. First, you have to give people back their pride, their dignity, make them feel good about themselves. And once you do that, the whole environment changes. Then it's easy to fix the buildings. So let's go back to the beginning. you rated yourself. Darlene was the only one. Let's give Darlene another hand for that one. She deserves that. She was the only one that rated herself as a 10. So what I'd like you to do is turn your paper back over where you wrote that number down. Whatever that number is, just put a line through it. And then write a 10 really, really, really big. Because that's what you are. We are all 10s. And because you are a 10, your future is bright. So if everyone can open up the piece of paper that says, I am enough at the top. And I want you to read out loud with me, because this will help you understand really what I want to get across. This is from Mark Victor Hansen. I am enough. With me? I am enough. Today I am enough. I am smart enough, wise enough, clever enough, resourceful enough, able enough, confident enough. I am connected to enough people to accomplish my heart's desire. I have enough ideas to pull off magic and miracles. Enough is all I need. Enough is all I have. I have more than enough. As I do all that I can do, I am able to do more and more. I am excited to be alive. I rejoice and rechoice every day to make my life better. I am happy, healthy, prosperous, successful, rich, loving, loved, and beloved. I am comfortable with myself, so I am comfortable with all others. I confidently greet each day with a smile on my face and love in my heart. Everyone who meets me is warmed by the radiance of my attitude. I work on my attitude continuously. I read positive, inspiring, and uplifting books. I listen to audio tapes and CDs during my driving and exercise times. I associate with friendly, caring, nurturing people who are involved doing important things. The people with whom I associate want more for me than I want for myself. The projects with which I am now involved wow my soul. I am passionately on purpose to do good, be good, and help others do the same. I am enough. I have enough, and I do enough. Please, take this with you and read it as often as you need. Daily is okay, because we are all 10s. Thank you so much for being here tonight.